if you get what I mean.
We're live.
So, okay, we're ready. We're ready with the audio-visual. I will call to order meeting of the Wilsonville City Council, December 6th at 5:03 p.m. And we will start with, we actually wanted to confirm that we have the executive session happening at the end of our meeting today. And so stay tuned for that. Oh, just a minute here. And I wanted to first ask if anyone has any comments on the order of agenda and items on consent, which is just the minutes. Okay, hearing none, I will go to councilor concerns. We'll spend a couple of minutes on each person, and I will start with Council President Ockerville.
Hi there. I have no concerns to bring before the council today.
All right. Councilor Lehan.
No, I don't. I guess I don't either. We should have a conversation about this sometime, though, about what's the difference between councilor concerns and councilor comments.
Well, let's talk about that right now, because
that's a good conversation.
I do bring that up. So I will start with this is a matter of housekeeping, as I've talked about with Mr. Cosgrove, and things we should look at. It could be, I noticed on the way in that one of the Christmas lights was out. Holiday lights. I mean, it could be something like that. It could be something that you just heard that you need to bring to the council's attention. Councilor comments there is a little preview there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it says when we get later in the meeting that we have assigned each councilor to attend certain regional and local meetings and committees and represent the city and citizens on business. And that is where they report that out, councilor comments. And that is my understanding of the difference between those two. Anybody have a different feeling?
Well, if it's, I do. I don't know how these reports sneaked in, but there they are. But if it's reports, let's say councilor reports. So where do I include comments that are complimentary, like what we were just having here about the Christmas lights? That when we want to compliment the Parks Department or Public Works or something like that, I always thought that's what happens under councilor comments in the public meeting, because you want to say, I'm so pleased with the
I agree
about
with
this
you.
or that.
Right.
Rather than this is a report about all the wonderful things that I have done for you.
It's not limited. I think it does say there's a list of things that says. I think it is comments also. Agreed. I agree with you.
So the first one of comments is just where a light is out, not I really like the lights.
Okay.
Is that how it is? The first one is for complaining.
Well, this could be a time under councilor concerns, as I've always understood it. You've been here longer. It may be something that is not yet happening. It's not about a meeting you've attended or something else, and we maybe want to look at it later.
Yeah. I mean, I
think there's a rigid rule about either one, but I think your point about the public meeting is important, where you want everyone to know about it.
Yes, that's the main difference. Councilor concerns in the work session is more like something that I need to bring up with the city manager, or I have a question about, or something. Whereas the second one in the public meeting is more like information I want to share with the public. Or like the Rotary concerts are happening, or something that there's a event at the library. I want to get the information out. It's more the audience. I see a difference between the one and the other.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. So this audience would be mainly intended for the other counselors. Not limited to, because this is a public meeting, but we want to, okay, so given that, are you ready to move on?
Yes, I'm fine.
Thank you. And now we will go to Councillor West.
Thank you for the opportunity. I do have a concern. I want to be really careful how I bring this concern up, just because I don't want to add to any hysteria, hyperbole, or unnecessary vigor that's not beneficial or helpful. But I think some of this really disseminates with my concern down to a local level, even our level, and regional. Right now, a lot of people are now just finding out that the state of Oregon is looking at potentially implementing a coronavirus verification system. It looks like that's probably voluntary, but I don't know. There's still a little bit kind of foggy, like what that might look like. I think we need more information, but there's more and more kind of evidence showing that an indoor permanent mask mandate might be put in place. It looks like the temporary one expires in February of 2022. And so I think there is that possible expansion of the mask mandate, I think, may be a concern of how it impacts our city, our neighbors, and things like that. So I think we just need to be aware of that. And I think it's a little early to say what action to take, but I think it's a concern enough to bring up to you guys. I know that that we are only one of 6 states to even have the type of mask mandates that we still have. I think that as we make health policies, it's really important that we are really evidence-based and nuanced about how those policies are implemented. And then if it gets to the point where it's something we become concerned about as a council, I think it would be appropriate if there was a collaboration between other cities in the county or other counties that want to have their voice heard or maybe speak to this issue. We might want to weigh in on that. So I think that's my concern, and I'm going to leave it at a concern. I'm not here to jump on any bandwagon specifically, but I really think it's important that we are aware how these mandates may impact the city of Wilsonville, our businesses, and our neighbors.
Thank you, Councillor West. And I just wanted to add to that, that as you and I discussed, there are some articles about the technical use of the word permanent in that relates to some administrative rules that just like our emergency order, there's a certain standard. We talked with the city manager about this, of how many days or 180 days perhaps that you could, that this jurisdiction is allowed to call something a temporary order. And after that, it's apparently not, as I understand it, not allowable to continue calling it that. And so then there's an option that the next term available is permanent, but it's always revocable. So I didn't want people to, that is something we can look up, and we'll ask for a definition from the state of Oregon on what they mean by that. So I just think we need to be prepared, because anytime the government makes something permanent, it's much tougher to repeal or to push back against later. And so just being really making sure that we're being very aware of what's going on and how it can impact us, I think, is what we need to be keeping our eyes watchful right now. Thank you. Councillor Linville.
Well, I think from what I understand that it's a draft rule at the current time, and so, but I just want the public that might be listening to understand that we don't make that rule at the city level, nor do we, while we might be able to influence or provide, I think it's going to be shared with the public, and that that Oregonians will have a chance to comment beginning late December, before a public hearing is going to be held in mid-January. So I just wanted to be clear that while I think Councillor West raising this to the council and to the public at this point is really appropriate. I just want our citizens to know that we don't make that rule, and it's not at a local level.
And thank you, Councilor Linville. Anything else? Okay. And within the counties, back to Councilor Lehan's point, we do gather with all of the counties in the Clackamas Cities group and in the Washington Counties group, and we have those meetings on a regular basis, and we go to them and pay a lot of attention. So that does give us that opportunity.
Has the League of Oregon Cities or any other groups we belong to started the discussion on this, or is it just really in its infancy still?
No, I think I discussed earlier that we asked our staff to look at it. They did not find anything on the record yet.
The league hasn't weighed in.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, I think we're ready to go to our work session, and I want to let you know that I'm going to turn off my camera just for a minute to make a technical adjustment here, but I'm completely listening. And so I would like to introduce our staff, Ms. Bayshell, to talk about the Aurora Airport Comprehensive Plan policies, and we have about 25 minutes for this.
Thank you, Mayor Fitzgerald. Councilors, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Wonderful. My name is Miranda Bateshell. I'm Planning Director with the City of Wilsonville. Tonight with me this evening, joining us by Zoom, is Chris Green, Senior Planner from Harper, Hoff, Peterson, and Regelis, as well as Brad Kilby, also with HHPR. This is the very first work session. This is the very beginning of this project. The intent of this project is to update the city's comprehensive plan to address impacts of a neighboring facility, the Aurora Airport. So much like we have policies in our comprehensive plan regarding I-5 and the impacts of that facility on our city, this would take a very similar approach. So tonight really is just initial information gathering and discussion with the council. We want your initial ideas for policy areas to consider as we do this update and for gathering input from the community on the potential impacts. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to walk through a very brief presentation, and then we'll hopefully have a robust discussion with this group. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Chris Green with Harper, Hoff, Peterson, Regelis, and just here to give a quick overview kind of early in this project and the process, what we've learned from some of our initial background research, and we also had a work session with the Planning Commission on November 10th, and so some of what we learned there as well. So the project goals, as Miranda mentioned, talking about potentially positive and negative impacts of the airport, the interrelationship between Wilsonville community and the Aurora Airport, identifying some of those. But really the main thing, ensuring that the city has a voice in these regional discussions around future plans for the airport and the area around the airport, so that that interrelationship with City of Wilsonville is something that the city can weigh in on in these larger discussions. There's been a few recent land use proceedings where during those proceedings they've looked at other jurisdictions that are within the impact area of the airport. Clackamas County and a few others have policies in their comprehensive plan that talk about their relationship with Aurora Airport. Wilsonville does not, and that was noted in those proceedings. So this would be an opportunity to kind of get those policies on the record. Planning for airport compatibility, there's a lot of different layers to it, federal and state. I won't get too far into detail on those. They generally tend to focus on protecting airports from encroachment of land uses that might be like buildings that are too tall, development near the airport that can affect safe operations of the airport. And that's a very important thing that we'll be looking at in this process, but also kind of from the community perspective to the airport and how that compatibility can work out. The comprehensive plan, which is where the policies generally would be adopted to address something like this. There's a few different topics that this could fall into, where the relationship between the airport and the city could come into play. I have a few examples here of fire safety and emergency management, transportation, economic development, and environmental resources, and community design. So some of these positive and negative things and just that interrelationship, these are all areas that could be looked at. From the Planning Commission, two issues that we heard quite a bit about, and they tend to be focal points in the comprehensive plan, is land use and public facilities and services. So there was a lot of interest in the exclusive farm use land that's around Wilsonville and around the Aurora Airport, and whether that would be urbanized in the future, and then extending services to serve those areas, and transportation impacts and some of those ways in which the city is interrelated to this area that's outside of the city. In terms of the project schedule, we're in the initial outreach phase, so we've talked to Planning Commission. We're looking forward to hearing feedback from City Council tonight. And then there's a second round of engagement once we've started developing draft policies in March and April. So between now and then, there's a big phase of community engagement that'll take place online and through stakeholder interviews. So that's going to be the major focus leading into the development of some draft policy language. Closer look at that engagement strategy. So we're going to try to make the most of being remote. Luckily, we're a little further into this now and have some more experience doing remote engagement. We're going to try to get direct outreach to those most affected stakeholders, and then talk to the broader community and participants that may not always be represented in these types of policy discussions, but would be affected by the policy decisions. Here is just kind of a list of some of the stakeholder groups that we've identified. Some of them are residents, airport users, different business types in Wilsonville may interact with the airport or have interest in the area near the airport in different ways, including farms in the French Prairie area being a pretty prominent one. A lot of different government agencies involved. I've listed some of those there at the local and state level. And then civic groups, the Chamber of Commerce, other nonprofit organizations, Thousand Friends of Oregon, Friends of French Prairie, some of those groups that have an environmental focus. So that is some of the stakeholders that will be making that direct outreach to. And I have a few focus questions. Oh, this is good timing. I have a few focus questions, but I wanted to hear if there's any questions from council, and it looks like we have one already.
Councilor Lehan.
Yes, on that last slide of the stakeholders, I think some of the specific stakeholders include those who sell fuel there, because that's one of the reasons that people touch down there is to get cheap fuel. And so we can't ignore that piece. And the other one that I think we need to look at is through the fence. So things really started ramping up and changed with the relationship to the local communities when through the fence legislation passed. So we need to take a look at what changed at the airport when they started doing through the fence, and how much more property is around there that is scheduled to also qualify as through the fence capable or whatever, because that's what is driving development. We didn't have that level of industrial development before through the fence. So that's what needs some analysis here, not just the regular who's impacted thing, is what happened, what changed when that happened. And I forget what year that was, 2003 or something, I don't know.
Thank you, Councilor Lehan. Councilor Linville.
Thank you. I am excited about this project, and I think it was discussed quite a bit in our council retreat and our goals. So I'm glad that we're moving forward with it, and I'm hopeful that it will be timely in terms of completion to have some impact or at least relevance to the master planning process that is currently off the ground and moving forward. So I have, I know the two questions that you asked for City Council, and so I've tried to keep my comments directly to those. So in terms of positive impacts of the Aurora Airport, I think there's probably two pieces that we continually hear about. One has to do with the economic impact to the city of Wilsonville, but we've never had data to tell us what that actual impact is to our city. That is raised quite a bit, and the airport in their reports report a very large number, but that they even specify that that is a regional economic impact number. So it would be really good to try and quantify what that economic impact is to Wilsonville. And secondly, I know that we do have aircraft owners and we have pilots who are Wilsonville residents. I think that number is, I think those people would be under your airport users, not just the FBO people, which are, you know, the flight-based operation folks. So I think that's a different group that may have some interest in having input into, and far more relevant than hearing from the National Pilots Association or some other lobbying group, but actual pilots and aircraft owners that use that airport both for personal and for recreation, or for economic and for recreational use. And then in terms of the negative impacts, I would like to just echo what the Planning Commission guidance recommendations were, but expand that a little bit. And I know that in your first statement here, it says Charbonneau and other South Wilsonville neighbors. I think that if you talk with neighbors that are living across Wilsonville, you're going to find that there is an impact both in noise pollution and concern over air quality issues. So I think we're limiting ourselves if we just think it is Charbonneau and somehow South Wilsonville. I know that north of the river, in those neighborhoods, they are directly on that flight path as well. So there are North Willamette River neighborhoods as well. And I think even Villebois, I hear from some of those folks too, that they're concerned about low-flying aircraft. And then another community group, which I don't think is on there, is the, and it could be included in your civic groups, is the churches in the community and those religious communities that also, I think are impacted as much as other community civic groups as well. And I think those are really my comments. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor West.
I just realized that I've answered my own question, so I'm going to pass to the next councillor as a more pithy question.
Got it. And by the way, yeah, we still have time for this item. I just want to give out a correction that I just realized. We are going to have try to have executive session before 7 p.m. So I don't need to run. We can trim some time off of another item. So I'm seeing Council President Oppervall's hand.
Thank you. I see the final bullet point is it just disappeared, but it was environmental, I believe. Yeah, okay, there we go. Environmental and other impacted groups. And I had a thought, and I'm not sure, if this makes sense, but I was just going to throw this out there for the rest of council to muse on and staff as well. I don't know if that includes utility providers, but I wonder if that is something that would be wrapped into kind of the environmental lens of this as well. So I wanted to raise that question really as much as anything. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think everybody brought up a lot of items, something that may not have been in these previous slides, it may have, but when we talk about the environmental impact, we've had this airport for a long time. It has many different aspects to it. People take flying lessons. There are some businesses there. Many different aspects to it, and so I think we're looking to capture what that means to our community and the surrounding areas in a number of ways, so that we have that in our comprehensive plan. One thing that I want to just call out is the river, the Willamette River, right there, very close to the airport, and how the people who use the river, the natural resources, the people who fish from the river, how the airport today impacts that, how that involvement and impact next to that significant river. So I'm sure that's in there, and they would look at that as well. And then the other one that I just wanted to point out is when we talk about residents, I hope we're talking about also the residents and who are driving, who are going across the Boone Bridge, who are using I-5. We know that we're really working on getting that Boone Bridge seismically strengthened and hopefully adding an auxiliary lane. But we also know that it is a real choke point, and how does the potential and current and potential future expansion of the airport, how does our surface transportation fit in with that? How adequate is it, and what needs are being met, so forth. So I think everybody's hand is still up, but I think we covered everybody.
I have a question now.
Okay.
I got one.
Okay. Go ahead.
Really quick, on the stakeholders from the government, is there going to be an effort to reach out to maybe bipartisan delegations that are in that impacted area also and get their input? I didn't see anything from the state legislature there. And are there any other state agencies that should be involved in the conversation beyond just the Department of Aviation? I know it was a slide ago, so I'm going off the top of my memory now from what I saw. But I wonder if there was a few more stakeholders we could get a little more diverse.
Have them look at that as well, like Department of Environmental Quality.
Possibly, yeah, maybe there's just a few more stakeholders that'd be appropriate. I know things have changed a little bit with redistricting, but maybe engaging new electeds or electeds that are still representing in that area and seeing what their thoughts are too. All that's going to be kind of a new dynamic too with the new election. So,
okay, how are we doing on providing a huge list of points.
May I just make?
Oh, no, I said your new hands or not. Go ahead.
Yeah, mine is a new hand. I took it down at one point. I just wanted to emphasize, and I know that in the documents there was a mention of the assessing the impact area, and I thought I think there are either state or federal rules that do address a certain mile impact area, especially of a regional airport where it is not a city airport. And so I think in the documents, in some of the older documents that we've had over time as it relates to the airport, the impact area has been kind of gerrymandered, and it stops right at the county line, and yet it goes the distance around the airport to the east, west, and south. So I know that's at least I saw that was part of what will be part of this review and recommendation. So I just wanted to reemphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Lehan, is that a new hand?
Yeah, that's my new hand. Brandon. I guess I should change it to a different color. But yes, other agencies, I don't know. I mean, some of these agencies are involved in the master planning process, so I don't know how much your planning process is a different planning process. But clearly, one of them that needs to be in there that I didn't see on your previous slide is ODOT. And because that's a major facility. Really ought to also include, I think, the FHWA, because this is a federal facility that impacts the whole West Coast. But also DEQ for sure, and the other ODA, which is the Department of Agriculture. And it is not the same to say, well, they have included in the master planning process the Farm Bureau, but that's not the Department of Ag. So we need input from the Department of Ag. And the question for DEQ is about whether this triggers a full EIS or not, and if not, why not?
Thank you. Do I see a new hand, as I call it, from Councillor West?
You do. I just wanted to clarify as we start to look into this and adjusting the comprehensive plan. Maybe just defining again at the beginning what the purpose is, and I guess much of the complaint from the council over the last, even prior to me being on this council, so it's been years, that we have not been satisfied with the seat we've had at the table, and then through the court proceedings that have been numerous, and we're at the point we are now, that it was pointed out that it was interesting that we never included it in this comprehensive plan. So are we hoping in the future, is the goal, that this will give us standing to get a different seat at the table that we still don't have after all of these efforts? Or is this just for our own purpose in our community to clarify things and get more community involvement? I just want us to be clear. I think this is a good time to visit that. What is the goal and the purpose at this point specifically?
Okay, I wanted to also add to that, because it stems from our discussion when we came to this together at our council retreat and before that. And it's not to get community involvement. It's and it was described at the beginning of the meeting. So I don't know if Ms. Bayshell or our consultant would be the best one to answer, because the consultant is doing what we're asking them to do, but the reason we're doing it, who would be the best one to answer that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start, and if Chris or Brad has anything to add, I'd welcome them too. But essentially, it is, I would say, for both purposes that you both articulated, and what I articulated at the beginning of the meeting, which is that as a community who is in the flight path and who is essentially adjacent to this facility, there are impacts to the community and to the residents and the businesses and the community as a whole here of that facility. And the comprehensive plan is really a place that sets forth a vision for a community, but also policy objectives that articulate our concerns, our interests, what's important to us as a city and as a community. And so it is a place where we can articulate things about our what is neighboring us, how we grow, how areas adjacent to us impact the future of our residents and our businesses. We have things in the comprehensive plan and even in our code about I-5 and an interstate area management plan. And so we really think about how those facilities impact the everyday life of community members. And so really this is an opportunity for us to put that in our comprehensive plan. We haven't historically, we have had other documents in the past where we've tried to articulate that. We have our urban growth management area plan with the county back in the early 90s. We articulated it as an impact area, and so we receive notification of developments in that area, even though it doesn't hit the typical threshold for development area notification to a neighboring city. And that's because that was something that was articulated between the county and the city back then. So there is some history there. You know, there's history of wanting to be at the table and be engaged in these processes, even though it hasn't been articulated in the plan. It feels like it's time to make sure that we have that articulated there, and it is adopted policy that does help give us grounds as an impacted community at the table in these different proceedings. So I think it helps to achieve both. It helps to advise staff of how to engage in different processes and what our role is if the council's and the community's interests are articulated in that plan.
And can I just interject really quick? Mm-hmm. I just want to say one of the things when I looked at this that I thought was actually good was getting additional public input. I know just before I joined the council almost 4 years ago, there was a giant kind of forum, unofficial, that was held. I was a councilor-elect at that time, but it was held at City Council. And so having this opportunity to get some of this formal input from our citizens and getting that, I think is actually a really good thing to hear those diversity of ideas and thoughts. And so I appreciate that that's actually part of this process. And it's something that I know a lot of people have been asking for a long time. And I think that piece of it is actually, I think, going to benefit and help direct this council going forward. So I appreciate that. And thank you for clarifying my question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. With that, it seems that we've covered this. I don't see any more hands. And I think we will now move on to climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking with Mr. Pauly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
There you are.
I do have a presentation, but let me fire this up. So if you'll recall that back on the 15th of last month that we had a presentation from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, Mr. Kevin Young, about this ongoing climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking, which is fairly far-ranging rulemaking around land use and transportation in the state to implement an executive order from Governor Brown about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So wanted to revisit that. So back on the 15th, that was a busy night. We heard the presentation from the LCD, but didn't have much time for discussion. So we wanted to bring this back to give the council an opportunity to discuss and also give a brief staff perspective on what this means for Wilsonville. So, as outlined by Mr. Young on the 15th, there's a number of topics that are for the most part interrelated. I just wanted to briefly summarize these again for the discussion. First of all, there's a focus on development in centers. So for metros, this means the regional centers identified in the 2040 metro concept, which we've already adopted our centers. There may be additional standards that we need to apply for this to centers like particularly town center. However, the focus on development in centers is likely to impact the consideration of future UGB expansions. The next area that was talked about was parking, which there's likely significant changes to the city's parking regulations, which may include either removing parking minimums in some areas and or adding significant additional parking management standards. There's supportive electric vehicle charging infrastructure, including standards such as percentage of parking spaces that have conduit for electrical charging. There's a number of aspects related to transportation. This includes the planning, the standards that we apply to development, as well as funding of future infrastructure projects. So, and these can be divided. I divide these in three ways. First of all, there's a focus on pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure. And this is likely to significantly impact in the scope of the next transportation systems plan update and other future transportation planning. I will note that the draft timeline for this would not have this impact in the transportation planning we're doing for Frog Pond East and South. There's a move away from motor vehicle congestion standards. So currently in the city, as we review development, when we look at transportation impacts, primarily we look at the delay of traffic at intersections. So moving away from that and looking at different standards is something that the state's looking at requiring. And also there's the selection of transportation projects more a focus on different modes in those funding decisions rather than traffic congestion. So this is all moving fast in the next few months with hearings in this coming March and adoption currently scheduled for May. So when it comes to city involvement with each aspect or topic of the rulemaking list, the city has a number of options of how to be involved based on how we've been involved in rulemaking in the past. And I'll go through these. These are on the slide here. So first of all, not monitoring. This is when they're not of interest or concern. The city may choose not to monitor something. Number two would be loosely monitoring, which we typically have done where there's some concern, but it's not a low priority or not likely to have a significant impact one way or the other. We will stay apprised of it and may potentially comment, but not follow real actively. Third one is actively supporting the League of Oregon cities or other cities and signing on to joint letters. And this is fairly common for higher priority concerns where our interests are similar to other cities. The fourth would be independent active participation. These are the highest priority concerns, particularly when there are unique concerns to Wilsonville, not typical of other cities. For example, in the recent rulemaking for middle housing, there were some specific concerns around new urban areas, such as Frog Pond, that we had specific interest in. So with that explanation, looking tonight for council's input, which of these topics have most interest, priority, and based on the level of participation council is interested in, considering the limited staff resources available in the coming months. Also happy to take any other kind of general comments on this rulemaking or things that you thought about after November 15th and reviewing the additional material in the packet for this evening.
Okay, Councillor Linville.
it's interesting looking at Mr. Pauly's list of participation alternatives because it kind of fits very nicely into Councillor West's concern about the masking mandates in terms of how our city might get involved. And that was just an aside comment. One of the things that I was wondering about and a little concerned about was the fact that we are subsumed by the metro area. So we are not like Salem and Kaiser, where they have their own area. We are in the larger metro of the 8 areas. Is that not correct? And so my question is, as we talk about participation alternatives, where and at what level would we have input?
So great question. So I would comment that there's certain aspects of this that really are applied on a jurisdictional level to some of the parking. So it's some of the parking, well, some of the climate-friendly areas and centers is really on a regional level because the region has done a lot of climate planning work over the years. So it's kind of a mix of things that are applied at a regional level, which makes sense when you look at what they are. And really, these are regional issues you're dealing with, while others are applied on a local jurisdictional level. So some of these will work through Metro, while others would be a direct response to the state. So it'd be a mix, if that makes sense.
And before I go to Councillor West, I know that sometimes, I don't know how many cities, or if Wilsonville is unique, I should say, in the level of participation its staff takes in the rulemaking process. Because it does take time. I mean, somebody has to add this project to what they're already doing. So I heard you say we want to allocate our staff resources into what is doable and achievable. So I understand that. And tonight, we're also trying to find out from the council which areas, whether it's regional, local, or whatever, which of these are most important to us. Is that really what we're doing? To participate in the rulemaking and to be able to have a say in this?
Right.
Okay. Thanks. Councillor West.
I mean, I guess I read this and maybe it's clarification and maybe you can help provide that, Danny. I really look to your expertise on this. Some of these are real big issues that we hear about from our neighbors all the time. And some of these concern me a little bit the way it's worded is we have some parking issues in our community and we hear about that often. There's specific neighborhoods that deal with this more than others. And so I don't quite understand how that might impact the livability of those neighbors in that type of rulemaking process. And then when I come down here at the bottom and it talks about the, electrical charging infrastructure, great. When I look at this bottom one here, this doesn't seem to line up with our focus, with less focus on vehicle mobility. And I don't know what we mean by congestion. We don't like congestion here in Wilsonville. It's been an issue with traffic. But are these specific rules that would exacerbate these things or like topics that they're going to address? Because I'd like to focus on more vehicle mobility. I don't know. I think so would most of our community, and making sure that we do have good parking policies. Can you clarify that, what I'm seeing there, those topics?
Yeah, certainly. So it's about transportation options and providing options. So vehicle mobility can come at the expense of other modes mobility. Trying to bike or ride down Wilsonville Road is not very comfortable. There's traffic. Getting the traffic through makes it a lot less convenient, for example, for bikes or pedestrians. And so it's a balancing and realizing that if more trips can be taken through other modes, that it can reduce greenhouse gases. And so trying to strike a balance with all that.
I guess I hear that, but we hear from our community members all the time. And like the number one issue is traffic. And almost everybody has to commute out of Wilsonville to get to work. That's the vast majority of commuters. People aren't going to really have the opportunity to bike to work. I work at OHSU. If I could bike, I might even consider it, but there's no pathway to really do that. However, we have been taking a backseat for vehicle mobility for decades now, and many of the policies around that have really exasperated the situation, and I think tolling is going to make it even worse. So I'm concerned that, like, I think as a city, we should continue to try to focus on things that help our residents the most, and vehicle mobility is a big part of that. And then also reasonable, good parking management and requirements too, and trying to make sure that we can allow people to have appropriate parking. The way this is kind of worded, this seems like a metro type of ideological kind of vision and not really something that serves Wilsonville residents the best with some of these priorities.
And let me be clear, this isn't like adopted city policy here. This is reflecting what is currently being discussed in the rulemaking. So,
yeah, we have I hear you on that. Thank you.
Transportation and parking are of interest to you.
If we have a voice in that, I think we should make sure Wilsonville residents' priorities are really heard in that, even if it doesn't end up the way we want. But if we are going to have a say in these rulemakings, like Council Linville said, we should speak up what's best for Wilsonville residents. I don't think that these priorities are focusing on are best for us right now.
Council President Ackerball.
Thank you. I'm looking at these topics and trying to consider where further opportunities for our city might lie. I believe in our council packet information, there was suggestions that there will be future grants available, perhaps in association with some of these different areas or work that would fit under the different areas. And so I'd like for us to look at what projects do we already have vision for already within our city that might fit nicely into some of these areas, and how can we try to maneuver so that we could take advantage of some of the funding that might come through those channels, I guess. I think that's critical to being able to complete some of the plans and vision that we've already established and our community has already supported. And I can, off the top of my head, I can already think of, a couple of them that fit into some of these areas. I'm also wondering if staff can provide some clarification. I think this came up actually in our last meeting, just briefly though, about the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, because I remember that this is something that our council has discussed in the past, and I tend to think that when we just passed some updated state level, I believe, building code, that this was something that was addressed within the state level. So I'm wondering, do we have two different entities that are pointed towards the same direction? And where does Wilsonville fit within, where we're headed in regards to the electrical vehicle charging? It's something that we have discussed as a council in the past in wanting to be able to support. And of course, Wilsonville has a lot of new development in our city, and it makes sense for the new development that occurs within our city to be working towards making it an easy possibility for our community members.
Thank you. I wanted to add some points here too. I believe this is looking at, it's a state department of land, or the DLCD is a state department, and they're making rules. They're asking us where we want to participate. I agree that, and I haven't heard anybody comment on focus on development in centers. Perhaps that's because we already do that a lot. So I'd like to hear from staff on that. On parking, removing parking requirements and or active management, there's probably a definition of exactly what they mean there, and I'm sure some cities have different conditions in place right now than others. And when you're talking about the entire state, I'm sure that I don't think anyone on this council wants to make parking worse. So I'm not sure what they're going at there. We want to make sure that people do have a place to park. On the last point, I did contact Mr. Pauly earlier and asked about what some of this meant, and it struck a chord because if you spend a lot of time walking, the last several years walking through the city, going from one side to the other, going from downtown over to Target, we have a number of people who do that. I do it quite often. You notice something. You can stand there for a very long, long time waiting for the chance to cross the street. And I've also had people contact me about that who walk a lot. And if this might be a way to make it safer and more reasonable for people who do walk while still keeping the traffic moving. I'm not a traffic engineer, but certainly we want to keep the traffic moving, and I have been in other cities where the way they time their signals or whatever it is more reasonable to walk. So can you comment on a little bit more on that last bullet, what they are getting at when they're asking about people participating in that rulemaking?
Sure. I think you're hitting it pretty well. This is a pretty complex part, and I don't know that it's fully understood how you can model the transportation much differently, and so there'll still be some work that traffic engineers will need to do to figure out exactly how this operates. But really, looking at all modes when you're doing infrastructure analysis for new development and planning your infrastructure to make it more convenient to bike or walk or take transit across town.
More convenient than very inconvenient, maybe. I don't think anyone here wants to make driving less convenient, but it can be a long, long wait to be a pedestrian. It would discourage somebody from being a pedestrian in some cities if they just can't get across the street.
Yeah, that's the sort of balance we're talking about. We do see the number of miles that greenhouse gas producing vehicles are driving.
Another part of it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's really what they're getting at, and offering alternatives is certainly one way to do that.
Okay, Councilor Lehan.
Yes, I'm just kind of catching on to this slide. I would say focus on development in centers is, as it has been stated, is something that we already actively participate in, and so I don't know that we don't also do all those other things. Obviously, we don't do not monitoring, but we monitor it and comment on it, and focusing in centers is something that we do. Parking, we're not removing parking requirements, but we are involved in active management of parking requirements and reassessing. I think we're always reassessing parking requirements, both in terms of storage of cars and garages. But as we look at the redevelopment of town center, we don't need more acres and acres of empty parking lots, which is what we have now. So yes, we're short of parking, or we hear complaints about being short of parking in neighborhoods, but we've got, that's because each of us has an extra 4 empty spaces over in town center that are sitting there. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure, we did change our code, and we are actively engaged in increasing that through our building codes and other means to make that more accessible all the time as demand increases. And I think we do more focus on pedestrian, bicycle, and transit infrastructure. We are very actively participating in all of those things as well. The less focus on vehicle mobility and congestion, I don't know what that means, really.
That is a confusing, that term, that bullet is tripping everyone up. And I wonder if I can
add something maybe
that
might help provide a little bit of clarification. This is, again, Miranda Bateshall, Planning Director for the city. I think what's important to clarify is these are not just areas in which they're asking cities or regions to think about or set as I guess, value areas or goal areas to work towards. The state is looking at very specific, detailed requirements for each of these things that will change how we fundamentally do planning in some of these areas, both in our methodology as well as in what we are allowed to regulate or not regulate. And so on that bullet point, the way I understand it currently, and they haven't figured out all the details for it, but it will change how transportation modeling is done in all of the regions in the state. And it will not just be based on like volume to capacity ratios anymore. There will be other performance standards that will direct the type of improvements that should be made when doing master planning, as well as updates to local comprehensive plans and the regional transportation plans. So it will change how the regional transportation plan at Metro will do its modeling, and that will impact then how each of the transportation system plans at each of the city levels are done and how they're implemented in terms of their modeling and the types of improvements that we would look at in terms of putting into the system. Likewise with parking is it would really be mandating you have to remove all of your parking requirements, not just in the centers, unless you want to actively manage, which is including like the costs on parking and generating revenue for that parking and being an active manager of parking. So I just wanted to kind of clarify what some of those distinctions are for those items.
So you were asking, I believe tonight, for our input on how much attention we want staff to spend on this, to participate. These rules have not been made yet. They're looking at them.
Correct.
So knowing that they're going to make rules in these areas, it seems to me we heard probably want to stick up for ourselves on our focus on the centers. We believe in that. We believe in the vehicle charging. And it sounds like our council wants you to spend a decent amount of time, probably independent, active participation in both parking and transportation planning standards and funding. That's what I heard.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So I guess depending on, for me, 3 or 4 are interesting on participation, but 3, if you have a coalition, it's always good if they have the same values and agenda and goals as Wilsonville, then sure, but not afraid to go it alone if we need to, if, you know, there's some type of policy that's really going to like muck up our traffic and make it worse or really impact our parking in a negative way that doesn't work for us or meet our goals. So I didn't know, maybe can that be nuanced, like a 3-ish, 4-ish, is there a 3.5? I don't know.
Yeah, so I would say that 3 is more typical. I mean, even on these high priority issues, the issues are similar to other jurisdictions. 4 is more, it's really something unique to Wilsonville. And so I think any 3 is kind of a 3-ish, 4-ish. We're working with other jurisdictions, the League of Oregon Cities, on shared things, but we're similar in middle housing where we saw something that was of particular interest for us. We kind of went more into a 4 on specific topics as we needed, but generally we stuck in kind of the 3 area.
I think that's a great point, Councillor West. I agree with that. Councillor Linville.
Well, I kind of, as I look at these, am really kind of concerned about the parking requirements in terms of us really monitoring that, because what Metro is going to do, I mean, there's some assumptions being made, at least in the documents that DLCD has put out. I mean, they're talking about 1/6 of Oregon renter households own 0 vehicles. Well, my guess is that doesn't apply in Wilsonville because those people have to go somewhere to go to work. So, and the idea of removing the requirements to include parking in each development or to have management of on-street parking with meters or with parking passes, again, those are going to be very different in the larger communities than they will be in the city of Wilsonville. So I think I would put a priority there, rather than, you know, loosely monitoring. I think the other ones are going to kind of take care of themselves, and that we won't be out on a limb in these other areas as much as we might be in that parking area.
Great. So did you get good direction from the council?
Yeah, that's helpful. And, you know, this is progressing. We'll probably have additional updates. A lot of this is still up in the air. It's getting, cities are wrapping their heads around it and commenting, and we'll stay involved. I just want to hit timeline. I mentioned in the staff report timeline. I found from DLCD, I asked for a more kind of concise list of when our deadlines will be. They're not ready to share that information. A lot of it's still under development and in flux. From what is in the rules that they point me to, there might be some of the transportation-related changes, could be as early as the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. And this includes some of the parking changes, potentially, which is pretty short, so we'll certainly monitor any timelines that seem too aggressive and comment on those. Centers and related rules are likely a little further out, 24, 25, but related to that, before and there may be some interim changes in Metro Code to comply with some state things that we'd be involved in as well prior to that. So there's certainly potential for a significant impact on the plan of work program we want to make sure council is aware of.
Okay, thank you. We look forward.
If I could just add one other comment, and that is that parking requirements and parking policies, there are really two different things. One is commercial and one is residential, and they're two different animals, and they have two wholly different sets of regulations and requirements. So it's very hard to talk about parking requirements as a general thing without distinguishing between residential parking and commercial retail parking. Just a comment.
Okay, so we will look to hear more and have it bisected into those two areas. Thank you. So it is now 6:07, and we have one more item for the work session, and then we're going to adjourn and go into the executive session. So I'll go to Mr. Cosgrove for the American Rescue Plan Act funding update, and he thought this would be shorter than 30 minutes, I think.
Yeah, Mayor, let's save that for city manager's business for regular, so we can get Andrea up to talk about the city attorney recruitment.
All right. We'll go straight to item D, city attorney recruitment with Mrs. Villagrana, please.
Good evening, City Council. I'm Andrea Villagrana, the city's HR manager. Just realized I did not start my video. I apologize. With the announcement of our city attorney, Barbara Jacobson's retirement pending in 2022, I have been asked to put forth a recruitment process and timeline. And I started that with sending some communication to council and then also our department heads last week to discuss, or to meet to discuss, the different characteristics and also attributes that our team is looking for in the next city attorney, and then also the different experience and qualifications that would be needed to be successful in this position. So one of the items that I'd like to bring up for your consideration is a draft executive search process. I'm going to share my screen. So this is a draft process, as I said, and I'll speak more to the timeline as we go through this and at the end of this process. So to start, the city would like to I would like to assist council in finalizing an executive search process and schedule. That's basically what we're going over today. We're talking about what different tasks we need to complete in order to have a successful recruitment process. This is a little bit different than a normal recruitment process in the city, as it is a position that reports directly to city council. So this recruitment process will require more attention from council because this is your employee, but then also it requires a bit more development from the HR department as well. Part of what I have been doing over the last week and will be completing over the next week is meeting with council, but then also our department heads to discuss, as I said, the personal and professional attributes required of this new city attorney. Part of finalizing that candidate profile and the recruitment strategy would be to have the mayor and city council identify priorities for the new city attorney, assisting the mayor and council in identifying the challenges that might be encountered in achieving those priorities, and then also identifying the type of working relationship that the mayor and city council would like to establish with the city attorney. We'd also like to establish a list of specific competencies, experiences, and personal attributes that would be needed in light of the analysis of the particular challenges and then also priorities. And then I would present that process designed back in Task 2 and then also our recruitment brochure to City Council for approval. In essence, approval through review of the document and review of the process and gaining hopefully your buy-in to the process is how I'd like to word it. So following the completion of creating the recruitment brochure, we would provide that to City Council for prior to distribution. And we would be placing that on the appropriate websites, the appropriate job bulletins, newsletters, candidate outreach, and that would be completed by the city's Human Resources Department. During the recruitment, I will be reaching out to experienced local government executives to identify the potential candidates on a referral basis. I will also reach out to potential candidates who I believe might meet the qualifications and also have the personal attributes and characteristics that have been identified in the recruitment brochure. And then I'll also be screening those candidates through a resume review and potentially some personal phone interviews with those candidates. The idea with that portion of the selection process would be that I'm identifying the most promising candidates to bring forth to City Council for consideration. And that brings us to Task 3, which would be when the council selects your finalists. And in essence, I would be presenting, like I said, the most promising candidates for further consideration, and then I would assist you as needed in selecting the group of finalists for further evaluation, meaning the selection process. Human Resources, we will coordinate all aspects of the selection process for the city, and that includes contacting all candidates regardless of their status. And we'd prepare appropriate materials for your interviews and assist you with the deliberations of the results in the interviews. We'd also arrange for follow-up interviews if needed, and have those follow-up interviews either as one-on-ones with either identified stakeholders or also with council. And as the last step in the recruitment process, I would assist council in developing an employment agreement. Once you've made a selection, we will help you develop the terms of the employment agreement that would cover compensation and other terms and conditions of employment. It's a very abbreviated, quick version of the process. I wanted to get to the timeline because I think this is where I will receive the most questions. And this is a very condensed timeline, given that our current city attorney will be retiring at the end of March. So over the next 2 weeks, I'll be developing the candidate profile, and with the hopes of finalizing that candidate profile for council on December 27th. We'd like to start recruiting on January 3rd, so opening that recruitment process to the public and beginning to receive applications from candidates. Part of this recruitment process, and this is just a draft and so it's a recommendation, would be for the city council to adopt the city attorney hiring standards, criteria and policy directives. The reason being is technically most of these interviews of this nature for a candidate of a high profile position are typically handled in an executive session process, To do so, we have to adopt the city attorney hiring standards, criteria, and policy in order to have those in executive session, those interviews in executive session. We don't need to take that step, it's merely a recommendation. During the month of January, I will be conducting the outreach recruitment for identifying potential candidates and requesting information from them regarding their interest in the position, and potentially also, if they've applied, asking them for additional information that would provide us with more information regarding their writing abilities, their experience, their general knowledge of Wilsonville and their interest in Wilsonville. I would be identifying those most promising candidates in the first week of February, and then council would identify their preferred candidates, hopefully at the February 7th meeting. Between February 14th and March 4th is when we could conduct interviews. If these are executive session interviews, we would need to select a day, and I do recommend trying to find that date as soon as possible. I know that it seems like February 14th is a long ways away. It actually sneaks up on you quite quickly. So I would recommend that we find a date within that timeline if this is something that, or if this timeline is of interest to the City Council. In order to have a candidate in place and ready to start by the first week of April, I would recommend that we select a candidate by March 7th as the latest date. Again, this is a very condensed timeline, so this is a draft timeline for the executive search process. I am open to suggestion or also any revisions that council would like to make, but this is in general the process that I would follow for any of our other high-level recruitments in the city. And then also the recommendation that I put forth as far as adopting the city attorney hiring standards, criteria, and policy directives. That recommendation in the public sector could be critical, as some candidates don't necessarily communicate their interest in other positions to their current employers. So it'd be very important to protect the privacy of those candidates by having those interviews in executive session. And with that, I am open for any questions.
Councilor Linville.
Thank you. It's a lot of work. And I know I've been through it, so I know it's a lot. I have a couple of concerns. I just wonder if our and I know that we're trying to get in this timeline so that we have a person here in April. I'm not certain that's realistic given this timeline. And one concern I have is if the outreach recruitment time is long enough. And then the other is once the candidate is selected, even though we select them, they will probably not formally accept until the employment agreement has been developed and they've agreed to it. And then my concern there is that unless I really don't understand the process well, it could be the 21st of March before we had actually a candidate who agreed to come. And I question that we would have, even if it was March 7th, and let them know on March 8th that they had been selected, whether a quality candidate would be comfortable giving only 30-day notice to a current employer. And given that, even though we select them on March 7th, we may not have the total employment agreement, completed and agreed to with that candidate, and they agree. And so I'm just wondering if it's realistic for us to expect that we would have someone here April 1st.
I think Thank you, Councilor Linville. Do you want to answer that, Andrea, or go to the next question?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Linville. I do believe that you're correct. We likely would not have a candidate in place within that first week of April, even following this very abbreviated timeline. This was, in essence, an effort to get as close to that date as possible. And as you probably noticed, there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of work to be done in a very short period of time. And some of that will be for council as well. It takes a lot of time to interview candidates. It takes a lot of time to look through applications and application materials. So this is the closest we can get, I think, to meeting that first week of April timeline. But I do think also that we have a great staff in place right now that, and I'm going to kind of look over at Ryan and hope that he'll agree that there's a short period of time that we could handle without having both positions filled, as long as it wasn't a long-term vacancy, that it would be okay.
Thank you. The other comment that I just wanted to make is it seems to me that almost 3 weeks time to do interviews is really might be a lot longer than we would need, given that if we identify the top even 5 candidates, to do 5 interviews in almost 2.5 weeks seems really a long time. I mean, it seems like we could get those done in 3 days or whatever. So it just depends on what the council's willing time-wise to put in.
Yes, and I think part of that is that's a recommendation of when we can hold the interviews. It doesn't necessarily mean that you would need to meet more than one time in that time period, right? If we could schedule one interview day on February 16th, and that shortens the timeline quite a bit. However, being very busy yourselves, I am sure that sometimes it's difficult to find that additional day to meet for a full day of interviews, and it likely would be a full day is my guess.
Okay, Councilor West.
I think Councilor Linville brought up some real legitimate concerns that I also share. I guess I have a question about the process. This would be my first time working to hire an executive position to help with that process. And what is the job market like, you think? I know that there has been globally in different industries a job market issues and reaching out and getting quality applicants. I don't know what it's like for this type of position, but could we potentially see delays just based on where the job market is actually, in many places throughout the country? And then if so, I guess that's my question is like what do we think of that? And then I also had concerns with the timeline.
So I do believe that this position is unique as far as our struggles with the current job market. In general, I've seen difficulties, or I've had difficulties filling positions that are more labor related in nature. This position is unique in the sense that it's a very attractive position for city attorneys in the area or also nationally, I believe. Wilsonville has a wonderful reputation of a very fiscally responsible organization and also a very collaborative organization, as well as stability within the council. So I think as far as attracting quality candidates, and hopefully I'm not shooting myself in the foot by saying this, but I think we will receive quite a few qualified and very highly attractive candidates for this position.
One quick thing, for end of year and things such as like in certain quarters, do certain times of the year make it easier to attract attorneys of this stature than other times of the year? And just timing within where we're just at and dealing with this really kind of matter and play into it?
I would say that starting after the first of the year is certainly better than starting now. Also, we're not ready to start right now, but starting at the end of the year, a lot of attorneys, I believe, are trying to wrap up some end-of-year projects, and potentially if we're looking to recruit from any private companies, then they could also have some other financial considerations that they are waiting to decide to move to a new organization or not. Generally, I see at the beginning of the year, recruitments are much more attractive to candidates, even if they're just passively looking for work. And I think mainly because it is, the time for new beginnings, it is the time for resolutions. So the beginning of the year typically sees a bit of an uptick in candidate interest.
Thank you.
Council President Ockerville.
Thank you. I wanted to, you suggested this, and so I just want to underscore and say, yes, this is a good idea, that we go ahead and try to figure out what potential dates we might be able to meet for the interviews as soon as possible. And perhaps we, in order to coordinate all of our schedules, yes, I do understand how that could be a tricky thing. And perhaps we try to save away, even, as I believe one person just said, we could be able to do all the interviews in one day if we really, plug through it. But can we put away more time than we think, and then that time can be released later on if it turns out that we don't need that time? But let's be a little conservative on trying to put away so that we have adequate time to do those interviews. And, perhaps the candidate can't meet on the one day that we've already planned to do our interviews on. So just if we could get that on the schedule as soon as possible, I think that would be helpful. And then a question, so I'm understanding that these interviews will happen during an executive session, which can occur outside of a council meeting as long as it is notified in all the appropriate ways. I guess another item is as Councillor West just brought up the scenario of what does recruitment look like? What if we're not getting a candidate or the candidate pool that we initially hope for and anticipate, what that process look like? If it turns out that during that month of January that we aren't getting the response that we had initially hoped, is there anything that prevents us from reopening for another month if it looks like it does need more time?
Other than adjusting the timeline, which could be difficult based on schedules, there's nothing that precludes you from adjusting that closing date. And in fact, I often will talk to our hiring managers and ensure that they know that preferred to extend the closing date versus moving through a process with candidates that you don't know would really meet your needs.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Good to hear that that is a possibility if we need to go in that way. But confident that our little city here brings a lot of positive things for a potential applicant as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think all the counselors that have spoken so far have brought up points that are really great. I would say that we probably also all need to participate in responding to points about finalizing the candidate profile. We're coming up on holidays, but if we can all prioritize getting some time to respond to our staff about this in the next couple of weeks, that would probably do a lot of good so that we are sure that we're ready with a really targeted, effective candidate profile. And then, of course, we want to hire the very best person. And I would agree, if it looks like we have not attracted excellent candidates, we should extend the time frame. But I believe we are in, we have an opportunity to meet these time frames given everybody dials into the time frame. Any other comments or hands raised? I'm not seeing any at the moment. So does that answer all of your questions?
Yes, I believe so. I am scheduled to meet with the rest of the department heads this week and have some meetings scheduled also with some council members this week, and that will assist me in creating the candidate profile for your authorization.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for making time to meet with our staff about this, and we'll just keep moving forward on it. We've been blessed to have excellent expertise and leadership in our city attorney with Ms. Jacobson, and so it's going to be a very high bar to meet, and so appreciate everybody dialing in and participating in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Cosgrove, looks to me like we have completed all the items on the work session and we could adjourn and come into the other link for the executive session. Do you still think that's a good idea time-wise?
I think, yes, but it'll depend on how many questions you have. I think Ryan's presentation is going to be pretty quick, so the remainder of the time will be how much time you all need to discuss. So if you can give us about 10, 12 minutes and then come back at 6:45, I think would be perfect.
You want to wait that long? Okay.
Well, I think we're going to need about, what, 10 minutes, 7 minutes?
Transferring the first time will be shorter. We need more time on the tail end to get back into the regular meeting.
Okay, so how much to get back into executive session?
Give me 5 minutes.
5 minutes. See you in 5.
5 minutes. Meeting is adjourned. We'll re-adjourn on the other link in 5 minutes.